How's it going? Brandon Lee here. So this is going to be a video about the lenses that I'm currently using in my kit. I realized it's been a few years since I updated that, so that's what we're going to talk about here. So I'm going to be talking about E-mount lenses for my Sony a7S III, plus an update on the filters I've been using lately, and a little bonus section on some specialty cameras that I started using and mixing in that footage with my main camera. This is not a sponsored video. These are just my honest opinions about the kit that I'm currently using. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to start things off by talking about the lenses that I've used the most over the last few years, and that is the Samyang VAF kit. So this is a matched set of autofocus lenses that are all about the same size and about the same weight, so they can be used interchangeably on a gimbal without rebalancing. And that's the main reason I've used them, because as many of you know, I do use a gimbal quite a bit for my shooting. I've used these Samyang VAFs for a lot of my narrative shooting lately, because for narrative shooting, it's best to use a kit where all the lenses have the same look. I started off with the 24mm, the 35 and the 75, then I added the 45 and finally the 100mm. The only one that I currently don't have is the 20mm. These lenses have a pleasantly not super sharp look to them, which makes the image a little bit more organic looking, a little bit less sterile. I wouldn't say that they have a super unique character like a vintage lens, they just don't look overly sharp. I have the manual focus adapter also, which turns them into true linear manual focus lenses with no focus by wire slipperiness, but it also makes it impossible to use circular filters, so I haven't used the adapter very much. You're supposed to use it with a 95mm matte box, which is something that I just don't generally use on my shoots because it adds a lot of size, weight, and complexity to the kit, and I am a run and gun shooter first and foremost. The VAFs do have a good amount of focus breathing, which makes them inferior to a lot of other true cinema lenses. They're basically just rehoused still photo lenses. But it's a worthwhile trade-off for me because I shoot even my narrative stuff in the same run and gun style as my travel films and my documentary shooting. So I need that autofocus option, and I also appreciate the convenience of that match set. Samyang also sent me their prototype anamorphic adapter, which is a 1.7x anamorphic adapter. It turns all of these lenses into anamorphics. I tested it out. I would say I got mixed results. Some of the shots looked amazing and some of them had sort of a strange bokeh character to it. My big disappointment with this adapter is that it didn't give me autofocus. It actually turned these AF lenses into fully manual anamorphic lenses, which is still fine because every other anamorphic is manual as well. But I was hoping for the world's first autofocus anamorphic kit, and we didn't quite get that. My go-to travel kit is the combo of the Tamron 17-28mm f2.8 zoom lens, that's a wide zoom, and the Tamron 28-200mm mega zoom. These two lenses together give me the full range of zoom that I would need for any shoot, 17-200 with no gaps in focal lengths. They're both fairly lightweight lenses and they're also moisture resistant, which is great for shooting outdoors. The 17-28 is around 400 grams in weight and the 28-200 is around 700 grams. So combined, they're about 1 kg, which is about the same weight as one of Sony's larger GM primes. I shot a lot of my short film Morocco Arise on these lenses because I was shooting in wet conditions, I was shooting in the dust, I was shooting in the sand. And while I overall prefer the look of primes, sometimes it's just more convenient and more practical to have a couple of zooms instead. So those are my two main kits of lenses. When I want to shoot on primes, generally I've been using the Samyang VAFs, and when I want to shoot with zooms, I use the Tamrons. Now I'm going to get into some other lenses that I've used not quite as much, but they're still interesting to talk about, and they all have their own little niche. The TTArtisan 50mm f1.4 tilt lens is a nifty 50 with one extra trick. You can tilt it for extra bokeh. This is a lens that I have not used a whole lot after my initial tests, but it's a good tool if you need a really soft look and you don't want to rely on filtering in post. The results look more natural with the tilt lens because the bokeh matches perfectly across the frame, instead of being a mix of real blur and digital blur. One more benefit of this lens is the built-in focus gears. If you want to use it with a follow focus unit, you have your gears ready to go. So for weddings or for commercial shoots aiming for a really soft look, this can be an interesting lens to try out. Another really interesting and unique lens that I added to my kit, but I still haven't used on that many shoots, is the Laowa 10mm f2.8 autofocus lens. This is an ultra-wide, full-frame 10mm lens, and it really looks like nothing else. Before I tried it, I honestly thought this lens would be completely useless for filmmaking. I thought, 10mm is for like astrophotography, where you just want to get as much field of view as possible and you don't really care about distortion. But then I started shooting with it and I realized that there are some circumstances where a 10mm lens can come in handy. And the most practical application I found was shooting for cinemascope, basically cropping the top and the bottom of the image, but still wanting to keep a really wide field of view, because you effectively lose a lot of field of view when you do that cropping. And then shooting ultra wide gives some of the field of view back. And it also covers up some of the extreme distortion that's on the edges of the image. Another thing that's great is that this is an autofocus lens. So if you're doing vlogging, shooting on a gimbal, shooting documentary, if you can't have a focus puller with you, or you just don't want to worry about the focus, the autofocus is really good. I didn't detect any strange behavior. So it is entirely usable as an AF lens. And another thing that surprised me about this lens is that you actually can use filters on it. It has a 77mm thread, which is not even exceptionally large. So it has a normal thread size. You can just screw on filters, or in my case, I adapted it to magnetic filters, and then you can go about shooting as normal. Okay, here's a lens that I just received recently, and I barely had a chance to try it, but I just wanted to mention it because you might not be aware of this probe lens in the first place. This is the AstrHori 28mm f13 probe lens, and it's special because you can actually rotate the lens 360 degrees, so you can get any angle you want regardless of how it's mounted on the camera. See, you can just mount it in a different position. There's actually two types of lenses here. There's a standard probe, which just looks straight out, and there's also a periscope, which gives you a 90-degree angle. So if you're trying to get the lens down into a spot where the probe won't quite fit, or you want to do a longer tracking shot through a narrow space, and you don't want your camera getting in the way, then you can just switch out to the periscope, use that 90 degrees, and then glide right through. So again, it's a specialty lens. It's something that I probably wouldn't use most of the time because I don't do a lot of macro, I don't do a lot of product shots. But if that is your bag, if that's what you happen to shoot most of the time, then you might want to look into the AstrHori probe. Next up, I want to talk about anamorphics. So I'm going to preface this by saying I don't have the latest anamorphics from Blazar. I only have the Laowas and the series, so that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Okay, so first up, I'm going to talk about Laowa's Nanomorph lenses. This is the 80mm. I also have the 65mm, and previously I've tested out the wider lenses like the 23 and the 35. So these are APS-C anamorphics, or Super 35 anamorphics, which means they're not designed to cover a full frame sensor. You're probably aware that you can get different colors of flares. I have the neutral color because it tends to stick out the least in the shot. It tends to be the most normal looking to my eye. But also you should be aware that neutral is the least visible. So it's the hardest to actually get a visible flare in the shot if you opt for the neutral color. If you want a much more visible flare, then you should go for the amber or especially the blue color. They're a 1.5x anamorphic squeeze, which means you get about half of the full 2x anamorphic look that we're used to seeing in movies. But if you want that full 2x look, you can use the optional screw-on adapter here from Laowa. So this is a big hunk of glass that you can screw onto the front of these nanomorphs, and this will ultimately give you a 2x squeeze. But it also adds a whole lot of bulk to your kit. So if you're using these lenses because they're small, let's say you're shooting on a gimbal or something, or you just want to travel light, this adapter is going to add a whole lot of bulk. And also it increases your filter thread size. So now you're working with an 86mm filter thread, and you will need to use filters of that size, which are much more rare. I have also tested the Laowa Nanomorph zooms. So we've got the 28-55, T2.9, and the 50-100, T2.9. These are both also for Super 35 or APS-C sensors. These are not full frame zooms, and they have about the same look as the Nanomorph primes. So there's not a whole lot of difference in the look you're going to get whether you choose the primes or the zooms. These zooms are not made for run and gun shooters. They are big, they're heavy, and of course they're all manual. So I would say the target filmmakers for these zooms would be people shooting features, shooting documentaries in controlled environments, interviews, things like that, where you can properly hook up a follow focus and put the camera on a tripod or a proper handheld rig. The other anamorphics that I have in my kit are the Sirui Saturns. These are T2.9 full frame lenses with a 1.6x squeeze factor. Like the Nanomorphs, the Saturns have a clean and modern look. For more squeeze, for more character, you can get an adapter from Sirui, but I don't have it with me. That will give you a full 2x squeeze, but it also adds size and weight. For me, the real advantage of the Saturns is that they work quite well on a gimbal. They're small, they're lightweight, and they are approximately the same size. So I don't really need to rebalance very much as I switch out the lenses. Now that said, they are still fully manual, so you do need to deal with focus somehow. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about filters. My workhorse filter lately has been the H&Y Evo Magnetic VND CPL. And this is a 1.5 to 10 stop magnetic variable ND and circular polarizer filter. The thing that makes the Evo filters really useful for me is that they are both magnetic and they can be screw on. So if you're shooting in an environment where you just need to move fast, go magnetic. If you're not changing lenses as often, or if you're running and gunning in a crowd and you don't want your magnetic filter to get knocked off or something, then you do have the option to screw it in. Another reason it's practical for me is because it has a huge range, 1.5 to 10 stops. Now, practically speaking, it's not perfect when you use it at the higher end of the range. So if you're going above 7 stops, then you will get a lot of color shift and possible polarization, especially if you're using a wider lens. I do have another way of getting more stops of ND out of this filter without having so much color shift, and that is to use an additional slim magnetic VND on top of it. So when this VND is on my camera, then all I have to do is slap on my ND64 on top of it, and now I'm starting at 7.5 stops of ND. So let's say it's bright outside and I'm using an f1.4 lens, then 7.5 stops is a great starting point. And then as I turn the filter, it just goes up from there. This slim magnetic ND filter is also made by H&Y. I recently also got the Freewell V2 kit, which also is VND, CPL, it's magnetic, and it has this really cool cap that has like a finger loop that you can use to pull it off more easily. So this filter is a bit different in a few ways. First of all, it is a 3 to 7 stop VND, which for me is a bit of an awkward range because sometimes I only need 1 or 2 stops of darkening and I just can't get it with this filter. It starts at 3 stops. Additionally, sometimes I need more than 7 stops, like if I'm using a prime lens wide open on a sunny day, in which case I would need to stack additional ND filters on top of here. But there is something that's kind of compelling about the way it's designed, which is it has these screws on the side. So in order to set the angle of the CPL, because a polarizer filter is dependent on the angle that it's at relative to the light, you use these screws on the side to screw it onto the outside of your lens. So it's just a different mechanism for securing the filter, which also allows you to set your polarizer angle very carefully. Both the H&Y system and the Freewell system also have other filters that you can stack on top of their magnetic VND CPLs, such as white mist filters, black mist filters, but I don't really use those filters very much in my shooting. Most of the time, I only use ND filters while I'm shooting because if I want to soften the image, I like to do it in post in DaVinci Resolve because then I have more control over the exact amount of softening on each shot. If I use a mist filter while I'm shooting, then of course it's baked in and there's no way to remove it in post if I want to go back to a contrastier image. Okay, so this is the bonus section on other cameras that I use to supplement my footage and sometimes replace some of the lenses that I would have used in the past, because image quality of smaller cameras has come a long way in the last few years. First up, I want to mention this little miracle here. This is the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. This has been my workhorse for vlogging and for BTS shots, basically replacing my tripod mounted setups for most casual shooting. It's also great for the occasional high angle shot because it's so small and it's so lightweight. There is a 1/4 inch mount right here, so I can just put it on some kind of an extension pole or a selfie stick, and it's much easier than trying to rig up a full frame camera and a gimbal. And because I've received like 1,000 comments about this, the selfie stick that I've been using with the Osmo Pocket 3 is my Insta360 extended edition selfie stick. There will be a link in the description of this video if you want to get that. My advice when shooting with the Pocket 3 is to shoot in D-Log-M picture profile and don't overexpose the image, preserve those highlights, and then do a little bit of color grading, a little bit of gamma correction in post, but don't go crazy with the grading because you're shooting 10-bit, but it's 420, which means you don't quite have as much color information as you would from a more robust codec. So basically, I just try to shoot really carefully, get my exposure right, get my white balance right, and then not mess with the image too much in post. And of course, be sure to turn that sharpness all the way down in camera. The next specialty camera that I want to mention here is the Insta360 X4, because the image quality upgrade from the X3 is huge in my opinion. It's 8K, which means that you can crop it in further and you will get an overall smoother, less digital looking image straight out of the camera with no manipulation necessary. And I found that this image is good enough that if I shoot carefully, I can intercut it with my main camera. The 1-inch 360 edition camera was also great. It also had a really good image, but I noticed a lot more compression artifacts in the footage than I see with the X4. Also, the 1-inch is not waterproof. This one is. You can put it underwater. And if you want seamless underwater footage, then you can use the dive case with this, which will give you a 360-degree seamless view. The selfie stick will still be erased. You don't get that with the 1-inch 360. And there are less stitching issues with the X4 just because it's a slimmer design. So this is a better choice if you want to shoot up close and you don't want to worry about which direction the lenses are facing. Now, of course, it's still not perfect. In order to get the stabilization out of any 360 camera, you will have to sacrifice motion blur. Your shots will have no motion blur at all, and you'll either have to add it back in post or just do without it. And you don't want to shoot in low light with the X4. It's still not a great low light camera. You also don't want to zoom in too far in the image in post. You still want to use it basically as a wide angle camera because even though it's 8K, when you do your final crop in, you'll still end up with 4K or slightly less than 4K depending on your field of view. And finally, I want to mention my trusty iPhone, which has honestly replaced most of my other cameras and lenses for most of my casual travel shooting. And of course, I have that smartphone cage that I designed with Smallrig for the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which allows me to get a better grip on the phone and change that grip out various ways, attach accessories, and shoot with the VND filter. Because when you're trying to shoot cinematic footage, even on a phone, it's important to use ND filters to keep the proper shutter angle and get that cinematic motion blur. When I'm shooting on my iPhone, I use the Blackmagic app, I shoot in Apple log color space, H.265 compression, and I use all manual settings. I'm constantly amazed how good the image can be out of this phone. Recently, I actually shot a whole action short film with it, which I can't show you quite yet in full, but in my opinion, in a lot of the shots, you can't even tell it was shot on a phone. The iPhone is great for underwater shots. It's great for vehicle mounting. One thing that I've really enjoyed doing lately is turning off the image stabilization entirely in the Blackmagic app and then just shooting handheld, because it gets rid of a lot of that digital stabilized look that makes it look like a phone, and the image starts to look really organic, almost like I shot on 16mm film. So as long as I don't need shallow depth of field and it's not too dark, I feel pretty confident mixing my iPhone 15 Pro Max footage with my A camera footage. And keep watching my channel because I have another Smallrig collaboration for another smartphone cage, and I will be talking about it more on my channel soon. All right, so that brings us to the end of my update on the lenses that I've been using lately and how I've been using them. Once again, this was not sponsored by anybody. This is just my own personal thoughts. If you do want to support the channel, the links to all these lenses are in the description, and you can click on my affiliate links in order to learn more and purchase them. Otherwise, just please click like and subscribe. I'm Brandon Lee. I'll see you next time.